I like to think of physiology really as a study of life, how life uh, is generated, how you maintain life in both health and disease. So it's, to me, the most exciting area of science because who's not interested in life and how your body functions? So it's really a fascinating area. I'm John Hall from the University of Mississippi Medical Center, professor and chairman of the Department of Physiology and Biophysics, and director of the Mississippi Center for Obesity Research. I was mainly interested in sports in girls in high school, not so much in physiology. I really got interested in English and journalism, and so I started my career thinking I was going to be an English journalism major. In fact, went to college on a small scholarship in English and journalism. But I took biology, which was really interesting to me, and then I decided to take sort of an advanced course in physiology. And I had a really, really good teacher and good mentor who got me interested, encouraged me in this area. So I decided I wanted to be a physiologist. He encouraged me a lot, and so I think that's one of the great values of good mentors and teachers. They have a great influence on people. I finished Kent State University with a major in biology and chemistry, and then got sidetracked a little bit. I got drafted and went to the Army for 2 years. That was during the height of the Vietnam War. Fortunately, I went to Germany. I spent a couple of years in Germany. After returning from Germany, I then went straight to Michigan State University for my PhD in physiology. I met Dr. Guyton in, I think, 1972 when I had a chance to meet him when he visited Michigan State University, actually, to give a lecture. And so I met him, very impressed with his lecture. And of course, I had known about Dr. Guyton because I used this textbook as an undergraduate at Kent State University. And then when I got to Michigan State University, I used this textbook again as a graduate student. So I started with the third edition, went to the fourth edition, and then when he came to visit us, I was really impressed. So I felt like I wanted to spend some time in the postdoctoral training with him. He called me and he told me he wanted me to come to Mississippi and work with him as a postdoctoral fellow. But he wanted to meet me at the experimental biology meeting. In those days, it was called the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology. It's the big meeting of the year. I met him in Atlantic City because I was giving a talk at that meeting. And I spent about 2 hours with him. He was president of the American Physiological Society at the time. So I spent about 2 hours with him, and he just talked about physiology. He just talked about how excited he was about the work that they were doing. And so, it really convinced me at that point that I really wanted to work with Dr. Guyton for 2 years. This was really the only place at that time that was doing this combination of mathematical modeling and using engineering principles to understand physiology. And I had taken quite a bit of mathematics and engineering. And so that really attracted me as well. And this was a unique place in 1974 when I came here. It's really hard to describe what Dr. Guyton's like in a short summary, but he's a complicated person. But I would say if I had to distill it all down like he was really good at, I would say, first of all, he's a brilliant scientist. Second, he's a master teacher. And then thirdly, he was an inspiring role model for all of his students and fellows and so forth. In terms of brilliant scientist, we don't have to really dig too deeply. Some of his concepts that he proposed are still in the textbooks. They were proposed in the 50s, and they're still the foundation of what we know about cardiovascular physiology. He won more than 80 awards, major awards from various societies. So his contributions to cardiovascular physiology, hypertension, and heart failure, those are really the foundation of a lot of what we know today. So he was a brilliant scientist. The second part of my description would be a master teacher. He was first of all, he was the father of 10 children. who all became successful physicians. So that I consider a great accomplishment in terms of education in itself. He taught the children, and if you were to talk to them, he taught them not just about physiology, but about how to solve problems and about life. He was a master teacher for medical students. He taught every medical student that really came through the University of Mississippi for 50 years, first in Oxford, and then here. Even after he retired, he continued to have him give lectures because the medical students were so honored to have him give the lectures. So he taught medical students, and I think if you check anybody in middle age or older who's a physician in Mississippi, they'll know about Dr. Guyton, and they'll know, or in most cases, he'll have taught them. So he really was a master teacher in terms of teaching medical students. And I would say his style was, again, to distill complicated things into complicated concepts into something that the students could understand. And he really focused on having students learn the concepts, the big picture, not memorizing the details. He was really against memorization of details. When we would give talks, he would make sure that we didn't have note cards. No note cards were allowed, no memorization of talks. It was, he really focused on understanding concepts and integrating information into a big picture of how the body functions. So from that standpoint, from the medical students, I think it was ideal way to teach. And he never used fancy PowerPoints or anything like that. It was overhead projector. He used his crutches a lot to point to diagrams and so forth. So he was really, really a great teacher. The third part of his teaching was for scientists, career scientists, postdoctoral fellows, and graduate students. He trained over 150 scientists, 29 of whom went on to become chairs of departments around the world. 6 became president of the American Physiological Society, which is the highest sort of, I guess, honor you could get in the field. So he really was a master teacher in terms of scientists as well as medical students. And then I think probably his biggest impact, though, was really through his textbook of medical physiology. Through that textbook, he was able to teach people throughout the world. The textbook is published in 22 languages, or has been since 1996. It's the leading selling textbook in the world. It is something that he did by himself for almost 40 years. It started in 1956 was the first edition. Almost all the textbooks at that time were written, and still are, by 20 or so authors. Everybody wrote their chapter, and it was really kind of disconnected view of what physiology really is. And what he was able to do was to have a consistent way of writing, a consistent way of explaining. And it was written not for professionals, it was written for students. And that is what I think distinguished the textbook. It was not written to impress physiologists. It was written so that the students could really understand physiology. And I think that's the reason it's been so successful over the years. It was written for students, not professionals. And it's now in its 14th edition. I was delighted and honored when he invited me to join him on the 9th edition. The 9th edition, I think, came out in 1996. But I've worked on it for the last, since 1996, so it's been about 25 years. And the last 3 editions I did by myself. And then the 14th edition, I was able to really talk my son, Dr. Michael Hall, into helping. He's a cardiologist here at UMC, and so it's really great to have him on board as well to help with this book. So I think in terms of his education contributions, it's through the teaching of medical students, through the training of scientists, and then through the textbook of medical physiology. And then, if I'm talking about the last thing, I said there were 3 things: the inspiring role model. I think everybody that knows Dr. Guyton has been inspired by his courage, his ability to overcome handicaps that he had. Polio affected him so that he could no longer be a surgeon. He was training to be a surgeon. But he really turned that into something great. He showed a tremendous amount of courage to overcome those obstacles. He was a tremendously hard worker, and so we all worked really hard. I think he was inspiring because of the things that I just mentioned: his courage, his ability to really bring out the best in people around him. And he was inspiring not just to the students and fellows, but also to politicians, to business people, and really people all around the world. He was one of those individuals who seems to be able to put complicated things into a simple picture. He had a great skill of discussing complicated concepts and distilling it into a very, very understandable picture of what he was talking about. In those days, he was really interested in high blood pressure. And that attracted me as well, even though I had not had much exposure to hypertension research. He was able to really explain his ideas about high blood pressure and using mathematical concepts, using integrative concepts and understanding how feedback control systems affect blood pressure regulation was a little bit unique. Most people were being very descriptive in trying to sort of talk about the different parts of the cardiovascular system. But what he did was he put it together. He put together how the heart depends on the blood vessels and how the blood vessels and kidneys talk to each other, how the brain and hormone systems talk to the cardiovascular system. And so the cardiovascular system combines the blood vessels, the heart, the blood, the entire circulation, and of course the pumping mechanism, and the lungs as well, because one of the routes of the circulation is the lungs. So every organ in the body has a circulation, has blood supply to the organ in order to maintain and provide nutrients, oxygen, which is required for the cells of the organ to live. So that's sort of a description of what the cardiovascular system is. One of the things that we did early on when I came, which was unusual, is that we used to make a lot of the equipment that we used. We had a great shop, and Dr. Guyton, so the first time I asked him for, I wanted to have an electromagnetic flow meter. I wanted to measure blood flow going to the kidney. And there was a device, it's called an electromagnetic flow meter, in which you put this little probe around the renal artery, around the artery going to the kidney, and through the electromagnetic forces that are generated, you can estimate the blood flow. And so I went to him one time and I said, Dr. Guyton, I'd like to buy an electromagnetic flow probe. I think they cost about $150. And without much hesitation, he leaned over, pulled out of the drawer of his file cabinet, pulled a file out and said, here's how you make one. And basically it was a very complicated process. And so, that's the type of person he was. He wanted us to make things. He wanted us to learn how the instruments worked so that we could understand what we were measuring. And so I think that was a great thing too. We can't do that with modern day genomics and things like that. But we made our amplifiers, we made many of the instruments that we use. And so that's why we needed a shop. I think, yes, he has really influenced a lot of the work that not only that we do here, but worldwide in cardiovascular physiology. I mentioned that many of the concepts that he developed really laid the foundation for how the body controls its blood pressure, what happens when the heart fails, how the body compensates for that to maintain life despite heart failure, how the lungs fill up with fluid when you have heart failure. So many of those concepts were really the foundation for modern knowledge. Now, nowadays we're doing other things, obviously advanced beyond that. We're learning about genetics, which was not a thing in his day, but still we consider that a foundation for what we do. So in terms of the science, much of the work that he did really was a foundation for modern cardiovascular physiology. But I think from my own perspective, probably the more important thing is the life lessons that we learned from him. The hard work, the ability to solve problems, the confidence that we had in our own abilities to develop and solve problems. So the life lessons to me were probably even more important in terms of what I do now and the success, if any, that we've had over the years. I think many people could say that Dr. Guyton provided really a career for them through his training and through not just the science, but through the life lessons. For me, some of the key things that I think about in terms of what has helped me over the years is first find something that you really love to do. Because if you really like something, if you really love to do it, it's not work. And so it's fun. And so you spend a lot of time doing it. Your families are calling you and telling you it's time for dinner, which happens to me almost every night. So I come to work early. I say work with quotes, stay late. But it's because I enjoy it. It's not really work. It's a pleasure. So you really have to find an area of research that you really enjoy. Not something that somebody told you to do, but something that you really personally enjoy doing. The second thing I think is important is to be a lifelong learner, to read. For research, for medical research, it's always changing. So I take something home every night. So I used to tell people, take your briefcase home every night with something to read. People don't have briefcases anymore, so just take something home to read every night and be committed to lifelong learning. A third thing that I think is really important is to find good teachers and mentors throughout your life. You're never too old to have a mentor. You're never too old to have someone that you can talk to and get advice from. So it's really great to surround yourself with great people. I think our department has been great over the years, mainly because of the great people that have been here, and that's why it's a great pleasure to work here. So surround yourself with great people, have good mentors and teachers throughout your life. And then I think a fourth thing I always tell people is you learn to feel lucky. And what do I mean by lucky? People that feel lucky usually are lucky. In other words, they have a better chance for success. Everybody has failures, but a lot of times the failures are not really failures. They're sort of diversions. They take you down a different path. And if you have a positive attitude, you're looking for those things that didn't come out the way you wanted them to. You're looking for new information, new knowledge. You go down a different path that you hadn't even thought about. Sometimes it turns out to be a really, really lucky break. I've had that happen to me several times. So I think feeling lucky and you think good things are going to happen, usually they do. And I think the last thing I always tell people is that, take care of your health. If you want to work hard, you have to feel good. And take care of your family, because family support is really, really important for success. Not everybody has a strong family unit, but people have friends and family that help them along the way. And so to me, it's either your friends or your family. Take care of them as well as your own health. It's really a great honor to talk about Dr. Guyton. I don't think anyone has had a greater influence on my life and my career as Dr. Guyton has had. And I'm not just speaking for myself. Many, many students, fellows have been influenced by Dr. Guyton. He's just an inspiring person. He has had a tremendous influence on people throughout the world, not just through his science, but through his story.